Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Linda Lamp, and I'm here with my co-host, Mary Ardania, and we're going to tackle Let's Become a Beloved Society, Conversations Illuminating Your Path to Wholeness. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to dig a little deeper into the topic of hurt people. And then we're also going to dig a little deeper into the notion of compassion fatigue and talk about that. And we also, maybe in between there, we're going to talk about a couple of other things that have come up during the week. So, and maybe we should start with that first, Mary. What do you think?
Sure, why not?
Okay. So why don't you go ahead and share the sort of craziness that has been happening around you that we were talking about.
Okay. These are things that happen to people I know. Neither of these things have happened to me, but, I have witnessed craziness. It just hasn't been quite this crazy. One of my coworkers was walking from where he parked his car to where we work, and it's downtown San Diego, and it's a few blocks from where you can park for free to where we work. And so he's passing, like, basically it was a parking lot, and there's a car parked in there, and there's guys sitting on the car. There are some people sort of, at first they were talking, then he noticed yelling and cursing. And then, like, the guy is standing up and the woman's yelling, and she gets in the car and is trying to take off and shake him off the car. Meanwhile, he is kicking the windows out of the car. He said it was like a scene in a movie. He could hardly believe it was really happening. And
Right.
I think he was in shock because he didn't tell anyone about it that day. I heard about it the next day. And then my other friend said she was getting gas, and somebody comes in, and in their effort to get to the pump, they nearly hit her, and then they honked at her like it was her fault. And then she did yell at them because, that's upsetting. I didn't tell you, Linda, there was another thing that she saw where she saw someone rob the Ross. Like, he came running out, the alarm was going, and it wasn't a mistake. It was clearly him running off somewhere and then pulling the tags off the merchandise and stuff. So it's like, it's wild. It's wild right now what's happening.
Right.
And, it's wild.
It is. It is. I mean, there's supposed weather balloons that we're shooting down and finding out that, there's this big spy network that's been going on for quite some time, apparently.
Right.
Everything from, big to small, everything from the government to, so I have a different kind of wild.
Yeah.
I have a wild in that I'm sitting in the living room the other night, and I hear tink, tink, like there's somebody tapping a spoon on a glass in the kitchen. And it's all kind of open. The kitchen is open to the living room, but I hear this, and it's like 12:30 at night. And I get up, and there's a mouse running around on the countertop, but to the point where he's banging into things and making noise. I mean, I've never heard a mouse do that. I've never heard a mouse do that.
Yeah.
Moving things around so that they're banging into each other. That's like crazy. That's desperation of some kind. I don't know.
Yeah. Things are wacko.
They are wacko. And I wanted you to share this because when we were talking about it earlier, the notion that the gentleman who honked at your friend because she was in his way, because he's trying to go somewhere. First of all, as a pedestrian, she always has the right of way. I don't care what state you're in. In my mind, as a pedestrian, somebody in a vehicle, the pedestrian has the right of way.
Should do, but that is so much not the attitude nowadays.
I understand. I
Yeah.
understand that, you
Yeah,
know.
I know.
And so he's yelling at her, and so she yells back. And the discussion was, well, he deserved her to yell back.
Yes, I said he deserved it.
Right.
I
Right.
own it. I said it.
Okay. I'll let you own it. And that struck me. It struck me in a way that I had to stop and look at it, because my initial response is nobody deserves to be yelled at. But it's not a matter of it's the word deserve, right? The word deserve is word that's used by people in power to force their will on other people.
Right.
Well, they deserved that.
Right.
And in this case, for him, it's not that he deserved it. His receiving yelling from the person he yelled at or honked at is the natural outcome of his behavior. So deserving, not deserving doesn't have anything to do with it. It's
Right.
energy.
Right.
And so that's actually one of the things that's really important for us to grasp in the moment.
Yeah.
Is what is the energy that's happening here?
Yeah. He put that out and he got it back. And sometimes we have a choice in that moment as to whether that is how we want to respond. We
Right.
don't always have that capacity, though.
Right.
And my friend that day was like, she even said to me, I'm in rare form. And I'm like, he shouldn't have released the Kraken,
And so I think that this makes a great segue back to the discussion of hurt people hurt people.
Right.
Because in that moment, not only was your friend, in essence, offended, hurt by having been honked at by someone, she's not doing anything wrong. And when you're honked at, the insinuation is get out of the way. I mean, sometimes it's, hey, you're driving by and you honk and you wave.
Right.
That's a different kind of honk. The honk
Yeah.
here is get out of the way, you're annoying me, you're doing something wrong. It was that kind of a honk.
And it was accompanied by him nearly running into her.
Right.
It's like,
right.
It's like, it's your fault.
Right. Like, I
That's
almost
the
hit
feeling.
you and get out of my way because I still might, like. Whose fault is that? Definitely not hers.
Right.
I mean, unless she's standing in the middle of the road, but in this case, that was not the case. Right? She's just trying to get her fuel. It's funny. We actually honked at somebody at a gas station on Tuesday, which is not our normal behavior either. But we pulled up and we're in a rig that needs diesel. And there's a sedan kind of car parked at the pump where, there's not as many diesel handles as there are regular handles, right? All the islands have regular handles, but only 2 islands have diesel handles.
Right.
And they were all full. And the pump right behind her, had she just put it in reverse and backed up, was vacant. She could have been there and we could have pulled up to the one with diesel. And we pulled up and we were waiting and she's on her phone. She's not pumping gas. There's nothing is attached to her car.
Right.
And she's on her phone. She's not even looking.
Yeah.
And so I suggested to my husband, just tap the horn and see if she's done. Maybe, because I do that. I get back in after I fuel up and there's a thing on the phone and I mean, there's always a thing on the phone to look at, right? So it was a very innocent little boop.
Right.
And she became extremely flustered. And then in the meantime, the guy on the other side of that same pump that also had a green handle was finishing up. And he indicated, hey, I'm leaving. You can have this one. And so he pulled out and we went to that one. And she came over and she apologized. And she said, now there's a bit of a debate here. I think she said her cousin had just died. My husband, who's not got the best hearing, thought she said her husband had just died.
Oh.
Either way,
Either way,
it was like, the first thing I said is, "You're fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
We just weren't sure if you had pumped or weren't pumping." And she said, "This just came in and I just was so distracted." And she said, "I'm not that person." And she said, we were like, "No, we get it.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
those people either. Like, we're
Yeah.
not, it's not like we laid on the horn,
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
just a little beep, beep, like,
Yeah.
and when you interacted with her, you could see she was very visibly upset, right?
Yeah.
But
And that's how those interactions can go,
right,
when people are not in total hurting people mode.
right,
Right.
right. They can go smoothly and be pleasant. Exactly.
Regular pleasant human interactions.
But it's another example of how people are simply not on their game, right? Everybody's a little distracted, frazzled, pushed, overwrought.
Very much so.
And it really, it's universal.
It is. Every single person I've said anything to about it in the past, couple of months is like, me too. We're all in this soup.
Right. Did we use this meme? There was that meme on Facebook, January was a rough year, but we got through it,
Yeah.
I can't even speak to what February's going to be like. We're not even halfway through it.
We're just like a week in.
So segueing into this idea of hurting people, last week we took sort of a high level look at it. And there was an idea that, that in many cases, I don't do that, you don't do that, and Annette doesn't do that. And I didn't want us to let it go at that level, because I want to be as transparent as I can about my growth.
Yeah.
And I know, even though I came into this world knowing what's here, knowing that this is not really real, that this is like a play we're in, and that we're all here doing something together, and that I've known that I'm not my body, that doesn't mean that it was an easy thing to integrate that wisdom into daily life.
Yeah.
And in fact, for me, I would have to say that wisdom didn't really get to a point where I was living it until I was into my late 50s or early 60s. And I can remember one of the first times that it became absolutely clear to me that there is this dichotomy between me and who I'm choosing to be in the moment, and my body.
Yeah.
And what my body wants me to do in the moment. It is a split personality of sorts when you realize it. And I know that for many years in the past, oh, welcome, Nanette. Great to have you here. I know many years in the past, I think that the hardest interactions for me, I would have to say, would have been tech support phone calls. I can remember all the way back into my early 20s when I lived in New York City, and I would cringe when I had to call one of the utility companies, because in that case, most of them, English was not their first language. And I think that's all I have to say. They're just difficult conversations when English isn't the first language. And then as the years go by, and then computers come along, and you're trying to explain to somebody what's going on. I think there have been many times where I've never lost it to the point where I'm screaming or swearing at people. Although I might have sworn, not necessarily directing it at the people.
Right.
Not above that,
Yeah.
But this one phone call that really was for me this crystallization of, oh, look at what's happening here to your body. Look at what you want to do.
Yeah.
I was on the phone with, for those of you that don't know, I live in Alaska. I live in a rural part of Alaska, even though there is a little tiny town very close to me, an organized city. We don't live inside that organized city. And in fact, you have to drive through that city to get to us. And so we live in our road maintenance is governed by our county or borough. In this case, it's a borough. And so there's roads that they maintain, and then they stop maintaining them because they're all city or state maintained. And then there's this little peninsula south of all of that they have to come to maintain those roads. So there's a disconnect even. They have to drive through all this area where they can't even put their blade down because it's not theirs to do. And then they come to get to us so there was some issue, had to do with maintenance, had to do with ownership of who's in charge of it. And I called over to the borough road maintenance office and I got somebody new. And this person, and this stuff is not easy. None of this is easy stuff. When you live in places like New York or New Jersey, anywhere on the East Coast where things have been organized for hundreds of years, they've figured all this stuff out and they know how it works. And there isn't this kind of confusion. But when you live somewhere where it's the last frontier, very few people have ever been involved in even the discussions of these roads from the beginning of time. So some of this stuff is just not really worked out well, not documented well. And there's a lot of sort of institutional knowledge that you get over time, which I had and she didn't.
Right.
And so I'm trying to explain the need of why I'm calling. And she's looking at some map and telling me I've called the wrong place. And I know for a fact I have not called the wrong place.
Right.
And I know the structure over there in terms of, and there isn't anybody else to go to. So I have to with her.
Your face just then spoke volumes.
Right. And there are those cushion things that you can put on a handset so when you've got it under your ear, you're not crooking your head. Well, I was on one of those. I was on a wired landline with a handset with that soft cushion. And I became aware of what I wanted. My body wanted to take that handset and just bash it on the desk to let my frustration out. I didn't want to take it out on her, but at the same time, I also became very aware that it was an effort for me not to get snarky with her in my voice and in my words and in my attitude with her.
Yeah.
And that was contributing to my need and desire to smash something because I was so frustrated.
Right.
And it just crystallized it for me. There are two entities in operation here. There is the me that I want to be, which is kind and patient and compassionate and understanding.
Yeah.
And let's work through this together so that I get what I need and do it in a way that is not at your cost.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And then there's this other part of me, which is my housing, which is just having a temper tantrum. Exactly. Exactly. And so I wanted to share that because I think it's a really good illustration for people to
Yeah.
realize that when these things come up in your body, it's not you. It's your housing responding to all that it knows. And something that we haven't really spent a lot of time on is the idea that your housing has collective memory.
Yeah.
Right? Your cells, and this is an aspect of creation that is still a mystery to me. But I know it to be true. I know it to be absolutely factual that many times physical anomalies that we have, things that are that bother us, that cause us pain, that are unique to our housing, they are often the result of other lifetimes.
Right.
And so we have this collective memory going on all at the same time.
Yeah.
And so when our housing is acting up, it is quite often, especially if it's acting up in a really big way, it's often a collective response that
Right.
it's displaying, not just an aggravation to this lifetime, but what wells up in it is the aggravation of all lifetimes.
Right.
This similar kind of moment.
Right. I would like to add something here now.
For it.
It's a really good example, and I notice that I still get tension in my voice in those situations, and I always tell the person, it's not you. This is just, and like the memory thing just from this life. I mean, there is a particular company. We have discussed it, so you might know who I'm talking about. And they used to be my telephone provider. They are not any longer. And whenever I called that company, I never got off before 45 minutes at most. After 45 minutes, I would find the person who could solve my problem, and they usually did. But I had to go through this gauntlet to get to them.
Right.
And so by the time I got to that person, I was usually like already frustrated beyond my wits' end. So I
Right.
would start the conversation with every person in those situations like, I'm really sorry, but I've been on the phone forever. And whenever I've had to talk to your company, it's been just a nightmare. So this is not about you. This is my accumulated frustration
Right.
over every time I've called your company.
Right.
And I would do my best to be, the person I wanted to be in those moments. And I rarely was. I was a very frustrated, upset person. But at least I put the disclaimer on there
Right.
so that that person didn't have to feel like it was personal to them.
Right.
And, maybe I could do better now, maybe not, who knows? I'm really glad I don't have to deal with that company anymore. But yes, I can really relate to that. And so the collective aspect, it's like, it's everything from this lifetime and then from previous lifetimes to boot.
Right.
So,
Right.
that's really helpful to remember if we start to get a little harsh with ourselves over our perceived failures
Right.
in
Right.
these situations. The programming of our bodies is very strong, and it
Yes.
certainly does require some reconfiguring. So last week when I was talking, I was specifically talking about, like when you're having an argument with someone you care about, there's the moment when you can go for the jugular and really say the worst thing you ever thought of. I don't do that, and I never have.
Right.
But that doesn't make me any kind of angel or superhuman. It just makes me incredibly sensitive. And I know that if somebody does that to me, I may never recover. So, I don't want to burn the bridge of whatever relationship if they are like that. Some
Right.
people apparently can say those things to each other and get past it and stay in relationship. I've seen it. But to me,
Right.
that's like mythical, because there are certain things, like I know that someone said to a friend of mine or whatever. And if they said that to me, I'd be like, okay, there's the door. Been nice knowing you, and
Right.
maybe that's why I'm alone. And if it is, that's okay.
Right. Right.
But that
Well,
is very specifically what I was talking about.
right.
And I definitely can be hurt and lash out. And I have learned to control a lot of that because of not liking the consequences when I
Right.
lashed out.
Right.
When I was young, when I got upset, I would throw a tantrum and flounce into my room and slam the door, saying, but you can't stay in your room forever. And at some point, you have to breach that door and go back out into the world, which then was my family. And it was very injuring to my ego to have to eat crow and go back out there. So I learned not to do that just because I didn't like
Right.
the humiliation aspect
Right.
of
Right.
returning to, you know, the world. So
Right.
the consequences to me were worse than the consequences to someone else of my behavior, I think.
Right. Right. Well, it you bring up a good point. Uh, it reminds me of Don Miguel Ruiz's four agreements, and the one agreement which is not to take things personally. And so when someone says something to you about you, it's actually not about you. It's about them. And we need to be able to discern that and realize that whatever they're saying about you is truly a reflection of them. And so I I know I've shared this story in the past, but it may bear sharing again in this moment. I used to live with my aunt and uncle, and my aunt was an alcoholic, and she used to wait for me at night, and she would have a whole litany of complaints about me, and she would proceed to unload those complaints about me, and she would also be physically abusive at the same time. She would slap me around. And in one of my psychology classes, I learned this idea that it's when people are in that mode, what's going on is really about them. It's not about you. It's about whatever pain they're in, and whatever they're doing is some unconscious attempt, usually, to remedy this pain. And and in her case, it's a perfect example of a hurt person hurting people, right? She's beating me because she has these ideas about me in her head. And so when you find yourself in those situations, again, remember this is about energy, right? It's about energy. We're all energetic beings, and we're in these moments of energy. And in this case, she's coming at me with her arm up, ready to slap me. And she says, you're so, I don't even remember now, selfish or whatever, and inconsiderate, rude, whatever it was. And I would always argue against that because she wasn't describing me.
Right.
but she was describing the me she had.
Mhm.
The me in her mind was that.
Yeah.
And so rather than trying to defend myself, I just agreed with her. You're right. And the arm dropped and she wasn't able to hit me. And then she came up with another one and she cranked it up again and she got ready to hit me again. And I just said, okay, you're okay. Yes, you're right. And again, the arm dropped. And that happened 3 times. We went through that little dance 3 times. And then she turned on her heel and she stomped away. And we actually never relived that incident again. Now, part of that has to do with the fact that I moved out the next day. That was a wake-up call for me. It was like, once I realized it really was about her, it wasn't about me, and I didn't need to defend myself. And I also didn't need to live through that again.
Yeah.
So now I had the remedy. I knew how to do it now. But I also came to the realization that I didn't need to do that anymore.
Yeah. You learned whatever you needed to learn from that
Right.
experience. And
Right.
thank God.
Right.
Don't need that in my life anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. But it's a good example of how the energy's flowing, right? And I kept putting my hand up to it and trying to stop it from flowing. And instead I said, go, yeah, let it go. Let it flow on by. Go ahead. Think that of me.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Like Aikido. The way you even did that was like, instead of that, just like,
Right. 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 I'm not trained in that either. but
No, I have only taken a class or 2 in Aikido, but I have taken other martial arts. And what I loved about Aikido is exactly that. It's also like judo, but Aikido is even more sort of passive in terms of really just letting the other person's energy take them out.
right. Right. Right.
You just kind of help their own energy redirect them.
Right. Right. Yeah, and that's I think most women's self-defense courses are like that, where you take the assailant and you take that energy as they're coming at you and you use it. Let's see what's Nanette got to say. I remember Oprah had a program about hurt people don't necessarily hurt people. She had a male guest, who had been sexually abused by an uncle. Oprah was quick to say, this doesn't give anyone carte blanche to hurt others. In this conversation, the uncle also had been abused by a family member. The male guest, 35-ish, never abused anyone. He felt that between extensive therapy and very supportive parents, he didn't feel the urge to hurt anyone ever. A counselor was also okay, so she's maybe going to say more. Right. So what we're talking about here are the natural tendencies within our housing.
Right.
Now, in this gentleman's case, I think, let me relate to it from my own experience, right? My mother was an alcoholic. She used to beat me. My aunt was an alcoholic. She used to beat me. Had a couple of boyfriends, alcoholics. They used to beat me. I have been drunk. I have never beat anyone, right? I mean, it's like I'm not an alcoholic, although I certainly could have become one had I chosen to. But
Right.
I chose not to go down that route. But just because all these people who drank and beat me did that to me, I have never once done that to anyone else. It isn't a tit for tat so much.
Well, and if you look back at what Nanette wrote, and I hadn't caught this the first time through, it's like the uncle was abused and abused this guest.
Right.
But then this guest did not abuse anybody because
Right.
the guest got the support, the
Right.
therapy and the support.
Right.
And we all know that the uncle most like that, that has changed a lot in these days. And so in the olden days, I think it just happened and nobody knew and nobody talked about it.
Right.
And if you don't get any kind of support or have some kind of experience, sometimes I think you don't need therapy if you have an experience later that helps you to understand that you don't want to propagate the
Right.
thing that happened, you know?
Right. Right.
But
The chain of pain.
the chain of pain. And, you know, I remember watching something, I think it was a documentary, and it was about this guy who had feelings towards children, and he was trying to get help. And it's really hard to find help, and people just think you're a monster. So, this is a thing that is really important, I think, is that we need to have more compassion and allow that we can help people to not become the monster.
Right.
You know, like if they don't want to become, how can we help them?
Right.
I don't know if I'm off on a tangent, but anyway.
Well, no, I think it's a great transition to talking about the compassion fatigue.
Yes.
Right. So I found this great resource on the web from looks like the University of Wisconsin, and it's an article about self-care. So I'm just going to go through some of the bullet points and we'll talk as I go. But basically, the culture of helping professions, right?
Yeah.
Giving selflessly, putting others' needs before one's own, and carrying out one's duty no matter what the cost.
Right.
And so, you know, we have a lot of that in our country. We had a lot more of it before COVID. But COVID really, the experience of living through COVID, if you were in any of the helping professions, it really did a lot of damage, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and has contributed to this idea of compassion fatigue. You know, when you're in those service positions, and this can go not just from, you know, white collar professionals, but also in a restaurant, right? Clients' needs come first, customers come first. You have to be available, you have to be on call. It can take long hours. There can be, you know, in the case of the white collar people, large caseloads. In the case of the restaurants and the service people, just a lot of people wanting whatever it is you're serving or selling. And so there's like an occupational hazard to being in service to people. And there's only so much. Okay, let's see. I don't think that's a studio phone. By the way, anybody that is out there and wants to call in, the phone number's on the screen there, but it's 907-1907-351-3003. You could call in and join the conversation. Okay, that was not the studio phone, but I have it right here if anybody does. So it brings us to a discussion of empathy, right? There are basically 4 elements of empathy: understanding people's feelings, you communicating that understanding, appreciating them as human beings, and seeing their world. And I think one of the things that happens is it becomes very difficult to be able to be empathetic with people when we're so stressed ourselves, right? When we're each of us not feeling seen and heard, and then we're put into situations where other people are needing to be seen and heard, and there's only so much we have to give, right? If we're lacking in that in ourselves, then it's very hard to be empathetic to others. So, the story that I shared about the lady at the pump that was on her phone and not pumping, and that whole thing, that could have gone a whole different way,
Yeah.
right? There could have been screaming and yelling. There could have been tears. There could have been, but in our case, because our cups were full, we were able to be completely empathetic with her and understanding and see her world.
Yeah.
And be able to have a decent exchange.
Right.
But
And
had we,
she wasn't being all defensive either.
right,
She was being vulnerable with you.
exactly, right. Instead of, had she, exactly, she could have come out of the car with a whole different, snarling and mad,
Yeah.
uh, as opposed to apologetic and contrite, So,
And some of that, since it really is all energy, you put out the energy that you put out, and then she put out the energy that she put out. So
right,
if you had had the energy of that guy who honked at my friend,
right,
she probably would have had a more different energy with you too.
right,
Because that's
right,
what happens.
exactly, exactly. Exactly. And so, in that case, it would really depend on how grounded she was. And that would have determined her response, because it could go any way. It can always go any way.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of where are you in that moment.
Where
And
are
that's
you?
why it becomes so critical to stay present here in the moment,
Yeah.
so that when you have a response, it it can be a response and not a reaction.
Yeah. And it's all like, what dance do you want to be doing? It's all a dance.
Right.
I had a memory during this when you were talking of a friend of mine was down here visiting, and we were riding on the bus. And there was this guy who was arguably a little crazy and definitely had some rage issues. And he's sitting there kind of acting out and looking at us and like trying to pick a fight. Well, me, I'm like, I'm chill, I'm cool, I'm not engaging. He's a human over there doing his thing. I am a human here doing my thing. Meanwhile, my friend, who is perhaps not as grounded as me, is like engaging with him, talking back to him. And I'm like, Jim, stop that. If you stop that, he won't have anything to cling to over here, and he'll leave us alone. And he didn't really believe me, but he did what I told him to. And then the guy kind of ended up getting off the bus basically while we were sitting there at that stop, because there was nobody on that bus to fight with him. You want to fight? And
Right.
if Jim had kept engaging, he would have stayed and it would have gotten all ugly. But it's like, sometimes it's okay to opt out. And
Right.
I always kind of opt out of people's random rage spewing in my direction. Like, I
Right.
don't need that ever.
Right. Right.
But that's it. It's all energy. And so it's all, the energy that we're walking around with affects the energy that people direct at us.
Right.
And then the energy that we respond with impacts how the whole interaction ends up going.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
all a dance. It's an energy dance. I like seeing it that way. So I'm going to keep that metaphor.
Right. 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 So, let's talk about this idea of compassion fatigue. This is
Yes.
one definition that I found. Compassion fatigue, it is a state experienced by those helping people or animals in distress. It's an extreme state of tension and preoccupation with the suffering of those being helped, to the degree that it can create a secondary traumatic stress for the helper.
Mm.
And this is
Wow.
really sort of at the root of, I think, a lot of what is happening in our world today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we get to a point where, how many mass shootings can there be in a day or a week? How many earthquakes, can there be? How many ice storms and windstorms and tornadoes and hurricanes and more earthquakes? And we as a collective, I believe, have reached some level of compassion fatigue.
Yeah,
Universally.
I agree.
And that's why it is so critically important in my mind that people reconnect with their divinity, understand what's happening here, understand who you are and why you're here, because it's the only way through this that's going to be at all peaceful and harmonious. I think trying to navigate it, not realizing, I watched the State of the Union in our country, and I also watched the response from the Republicans. And I just have to say that there are millions of people, if not billions of people on this planet that are absolutely clueless as to what's happening here. And they've given all kinds of power and uh, and credibility to ideas and notions that just absolutely don't even exist. The idea that there is some evil force anywhere out there is such an excuse that those who use that term have come up with. And it is a way to try and control us. And it's just not true. It is just not true. We are each individually divine aspects.
And the thing that's really important about this, I think that a friend posted, and the connection that really hit for me is those things cause people to despise other humans. Like
Right.
all those conspiracy theories or even the divisions among parties, like part of the control aspect is to demonize the other side. And then
Exactly.
you come out of the gate despising the other people.
Right.
And so there's no possibility of any kind of true dialogue and coming to an understanding.
Right.
The other thing I want to say as far as compassion fatigue was, it really hit me when you were saying that, because when I started at this job, I work at a law school, I work in the legal clinics department, and we had a pro bono legal clinic every single Wednesday at a library that I could send anybody to for any problem they were having. It was general clinic for the public. It was open to really anyone, anything. That closed right before the pandemic, and that professor is no longer here. And so that filled a real need in this community. And now we don't have that. And so in my job, there are a lot of people who I have to tell, we don't have a clinic that can help you. And I don't know anybody who does. I don't know anybody who can help you with free or low income help about your legal problems. Sorry. Your only option is to find some lawyer and pay them hundreds of dollars an hour or be screwed. I don't say it that way, but that's the truth. Every single day, there's at least a few people who I have to say that to. And that has really changed the nature of my job. and changed how I feel in my job.
Right.
And like part of why I'm so exhausted and I'm
Right.
running on fumes is
Right.
because it's really hard and depressing
Yes.
to
So
know
what
all
you're
day long,
describing is
every
burnout.
day, huh?
What you're describing is burnout.
Yeah, but it's like every single day, yeah, I'm reminded of all the people who need help and can't get it.
Right. 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 It's heartbreaking. It's
It's
heartbreaking.
heartbreaking.
Let me
And I
just
just have one tiny little aspect. These people are looking for all sorts of help and can't get any of it. You
right.
know, it's
Right.
terrible.
Right. Right.
Oh,
So a definition of burnout is a syndrome. This is according to Chris Lloyd et al. Burnout is a syndrome with dimensions of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced feelings of personal accomplishment. And you can't feel good about your personal accomplishments when you're having to tell people you can't help them. It's I mean, just the energy of not being able to help, it feeds right into that
yeah,
lack of personal accomplishment feeling.
yeah, totally.
There's some warning signs of compassion fatigue that I think we should just go through here.
Yes, please.
Um, because and some of these we can talk about, we're going to run out of time talking about them today, but some of them may strike you the wrong way when I read them, but just it's an overall list, and it doesn't mean everybody's going to have all of these symptoms.
Yeah, and you
Symptoms of
can read them and we can talk about them next time if we want
Yeah,
to.
yeah. Symptoms of compassion fatigue can include excessive blaming, bottled up emotions, isolation from others, problems with intimacy and in personal relationships, substance abuse used to mask feelings, compulsive behaviors such as overspending, overeating, gambling, sexual addictions, legal problems, indebtedness, poor self-care, including hygiene and appearance, recurrence of nightmares and flashbacks to a traumatic event, chronic physical ailments such as gastrointestinal problems and recurrent colds, apathy, sad, no longer find activities pleasurable, anger and irritability, difficulty concentrating, preoccupied, and in denial about problems. So that's quite a list, right?
Yep.
Then it can go on here. Reduced ability to feel sympathy and empathy, right? So now you're feeling disconnected from people and you can't even relate to them. Dread of working with certain clients or patients. Receives an unusual number of complaints from others. Then that would be an indicator now that your compassion fatigue is actually impacting your ability to work. Voices excessive complaints about administrative functions, absenteeism, missing work, taking a lot of sick days, impaired ability to make decisions and care for patients or clients, difficulty separating work life from personal life, disruption to worldview, and a diminished sense of enjoyment of your career. So these are all things, and then here's some warning signs of burnout. So signs of physical and emotional exhaustion are chronic fatigue, insomnia, forgetfulness, impaired concentration and attention. Physical symptoms, increased illness, loss of appetite, anxiety, depression, anger. Uh,
I never
uh,
get loss of appetite though. Why can't I get that one?
yeah,
I
because
get the other
because
one,
the
comfort eating.
opposite is you want to eat comfort food, right?
Yeah,
I want
I
to eat
always get
macaroni
that
and
one.
cheese. And then signs of cynicism and detachment are a loss of enjoyment, pessimism, isolation, and detachment. Signs of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. This is under burnout. Feelings of apathy and hopelessness, increased irritability, and a lack of productivity and poor performance. So, I think what we can do is maybe talk about next week, we can talk about some strategies for ways to manage compassion fatigue and burnout.
That'd be nice, because I could use some strategies. You would be interested to know how many of those I check off,
Well, I think it would be interesting to see how many people check off.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot.
I think so too. I think there's a lot going around of burnout for sure, as well as compassion fatigue.
Right. And so for those of you who are watching or listening now or after the fact, remember that you can always text your questions or to 1-907-351-3003. You can also call. If you don't get me, you can leave a voicemail. You can email your questions to questions@walkingthroughyourwalls.com. You can visit the website lindalamp.com. That's LYNDALAMP.com.
And we really want your questions, if you have them.
Absolutely.
And your comments, to help us decide what to focus on.
Right. Right. This
it
show
helps.
is for you.
Yeah.
It's not for us. It's for you, our
it's for
listeners and
us
viewers.
too.
I mean,
But
it is for us, but
we're doing it for you and for us, because we always need the medicine that we want to give, right?
Right. Right. So we are a resource here for you, and we hope to take advantage of
it. We want to be a resource for you.
Absolutely.
So interactive.
Okay. So I think Nanette was saying, will we chat about that next week? Yes. Good.
Yeah. The burnout and compassion fatigue and all that awesome stuff.
Yes. And so, we've got a couple of minutes left. As you're going through this next week, try to be present in your body. And often what can help you do that is to just take a deep breath when you think of it. Just take a deep breath and try to bring that breath all the way down as far as you can. If you can bring it all the way down into your abdomen, that's ideal. A lot of people, because of the stress they carry in their body, they'll find that really their breath can only go into their lungs. With practice, you can get better at that. But take a deep breath and bring yourself back into the moment. And especially if you starting to feel upset. The minute you start to feel unbalanced or upset or in any way ungrounded, take a couple of nice deep breaths. And if you're in the middle of a conversation with somebody, just say, hang on a second. I just need to take a deep breath here and get myself grounded.
Yeah. Our breath is the connection to the life force.
It is.
And a thing that you have said sometimes, Linda, that I think is really important, because when I focus on my breath, sometimes I just tense up. But if I think about life is breathing me, source is breathing me.
Right.
Then it's relaxing to take a deep breath.
Right. Because you can give it up. It's not up to us.
Exactly.
Right? We're being breathed.
Exactly.
And when we can make that connection, then it can calm us down and give us that moment. And you can model that to other people, and that's okay. That's a good thing. Let people see you in your self-care.
Yeah.
It might encourage them in their self-care.
Yeah. And I like when I remember that, because it makes all the difference.
Right. Okay. I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you for being here so much. Thank you, Mary, for being here with me. And thank you to Mr. Ziggy for sleeping through the event once more.
I like these little jingle bells that you hear sometimes in the background.
While he's chewing on his chew.
Mr. Ziggy.
All right. Namaste and much love. And we will pick up next week where we left off.
Yes, we love you all.